Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast. Today's show is about the recipe for executive success. And I am so glad to have with me Dr. Aparna Joshi, who is a professor of management at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business and an internationally recognized expert on leadership, workplace inclusion, and organizational behavior. For more than 20 years, her research has examined how social differences can create barriers to opportunity, with particular focus on gender and professional settings ranging from science and engineering to law and the executive suite. Her work helps organizations identify practical ways to reduce those barriers, foster inclusion, and develop stronger leaders. Her award-winning research has been published in many of the world's leading management journals, has earned numerous honors, including the 2025 Academy of Management Journal Impact Award, recognizing research that has made a lasting impact on leadership, theory, and practice. She is also a fellow of the Academy of Management and has been recognized among Stratford University's top 2% of scientists worldwide. Dr. Joshi earned her PhD in Management and Labor Relations from Rutgers University and also holds graduate degrees from the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai and JNU in New Delhi, also along with a bachelor's degree from Elphinstone College in Mumbai. Without further ado, welcome.
Hi, Dr. Gore. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be on the Pin Leader podcast. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. You know, we talk about research, and we talked a little bit offline about your top 2% of scientists on this. It's amazing the kind of research that you're doing. It talks about finding the recipe for success. You know, what ingredients consistently appeared, especially for among women who excelled as CEOs?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Dr. Gore. Actually, it's been a topic of research that we've been working on for many years. And when we started working on it, we often frame women's journey to the highest levels from the standpoint of, when she, there's been many different ways of thinking about it. For example, there's been this glass cliff framing, which suggests that, women are sort of set up to fail when they make it to the highest levels. Our approach here was to take a slightly different perspective on it, which was to say, what leads to women's success once they get to the highest levels? Because that sort of sets the stage or other firms, for firms more broadly to replicate those key ingredients that go into women's success. So, yeah, we looked at all the data that's out there on, up till the time when we were working on the paper, that is, which was over 15 years or so. And we looked at what was the confluence of different factors that led to women performing higher than industry average once they became CEOs? What factors led to their success in terms of their firm's performance relative to their industry peers, right? So that was sort of our focus. And we found basically 3 recipes for success. And the most predominant recipe was when there was a long tenured and powerful predecessor who left the firm performing relatively well and completely handed over the role. And what I mean by completely handed over is they sometimes in the C-suite, CEOs will remain on the board of directors even after they step down. In this most prominent recipe, those CEOs didn't. They just fully left the firm. And there are many such great examples, for instance, in the US context, such as PepsiCo or DuPont and so on, where you see that kind of success. So that was sort of the most prominent recipe for success. There were a couple of others which were slightly less prominent, but one was where the CEO would stay on the board of directors, and the CEO and the outgoing CEO, as well as the incoming female CEO, had a completely overlapping profile, right? So, for example, if they had certain kinds of cross-functional roles prior to, if their experience was in consulting, finance, and management, the outgoing CEO's profile fit the incoming CEO's profile. So there was this sort of more match on the profile side of the incoming CEO from their skills and their experience standpoint. So that was the second recipe for success. And a third recipe for success actually was also really interesting because it applied to where firms are performing poorly when the new CEO came in, but the incoming CEO, the woman who took over the reins, was actually able to turn it around. So in those cases as well, there was a partnership between the outgoing CEO and the incoming CEO. The outgoing CEOs remained on the board, but the incoming CEO was also able to turn the firm around. Now, this seems like sort of complicated. I talked about three different recipes, but the one thing I want the listeners to take away from this, the main thing I want to take away from this is that in all of these recipes, there was one key ingredient, and that was a long term, highly tenured predecessor CEO, the person that was leaving.
Mm.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that in all of the cases that we studied for this paper, there is all of the people leaving the role, that is, the outgoing CEOs, were men. And that's just the nature of the data that we had. There was only one CEO succession that was a woman CEO handing over the reins to an incoming woman CEO. And that was in the case of Xerox, where Ursula Burns took over from Anne Mulcahy. But other than that, all of these were all Fortune 500 firms, and they were all primarily men leaving the role and paving the way for the incoming female CEO.
Now, did any of that surprise you? I mean, were there any findings that surprised you or challenged maybe some common assumptions? Because to me, that
Yeah.
sounds like okay, I've seen that. So that doesn't surprise me. But I'm not sure exactly why it doesn't surprise me, but it doesn't. But anything that surprised you?
Yeah, I think what surprised us was when we think about succession events, though, one thing that's unique about the CEO succession events is the involvement of the outgoing person. And this applies more broadly to successions. I think people underestimate actually the role that the outgoing person plays. We often think, oh, this person's left, a new person is coming in. To me, what's been most interesting about this research is, and we often train students, we talk about research, we talk about an incoming, what does it take to become a leader?
Mm-hmm.
What does it take to be an incoming leader? What are the challenges that incoming leaders face? I think a big picture surprising thing for us is the importance of the person leaving.
Ah.
Because they don't just leave. I mean, what you're leaving is an architecture, a legacy, a footprint, but you're also leaving those mechanisms that set up the next person's sort of success or failure in that role. So I think more broadly from a succession standpoint, I think, and we've done some other work on CEO successions as well. And it's surprising how important the outgoing leaders are. And also that outgoing leaders vary in how they take on the role of leaving. Leaving your job is also not easy,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, remember, these are people who worked many years, who have been at the forefront of their own fields, and they've kind of made it to the highest levels. Leaving that job is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way in which you leave it matters, right? So for us, the fact that that all of the people, most of them, as I said, barring one, is a man, right? So the role of men is I think and you're right, that's not entirely surprising, but in the case of these S&P 1500 and Fortune 500 firms, it's still, I think, one cannot overstate it.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be overstated, the role of men in paving the way, because that's the predominant demographic, even today in leadership, right? So when we look at the number of women who were entering that role, that number is less than 90. It's about 88 women over the period of, we did the project, that was some years back, was between 1989 and 2009. There were less than 90 women in that entire data set across Fortune 500 firms for that many years, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about a very small sample of women getting into these roles to begin with.
Yes.
So I often get, people often say to me, is gender bias still a thing? Are women still, is this still an issue? And Unfortunately, it very much is at the highest levels, not at the entry levels in many jobs and many professions, but certainly at the highest levels. So I think the first thing that's surprising to us is there are really few women.
Mhm.
And the second, I mean, even when we say that, people often still, I think, have some skepticism about, but we see so many women on, in the media and in the, we see so many women, and so being more successful compared to the 80s and 60s, women are doing so much, so things like that come up. So I just want to, I just want to make it very clear to the audience that this particular domain of this sphere of leadership is overwhelmingly male dominated. And so the role of men in paving the way for gender inclusion may or may not be surprising, but hey, it's still 100% important.
Well, I think when you said your study was from 2009, you had that scope of time. Really, what you're saying is it does, even now in
Yeah,
2026, you're still
sure.
seeing this as because you said the statistics with how many are actually replacing. And I had a number of CEO friends that actually
Mm,
what they see is they're witnessing. And again, it's not the research and stats. That's why, as a statistician, you can come down and show the
yeah,
significant levels. But they're like, well, if there is a woman in the role, there may not be a woman that comes in behind her as
yeah,
she leaves. I think there's something said. It does not, I would say, even from a CEO,
yeah.
even when we're talking about directorships or those that are actually not in
Mhm.
C suite, but we're also talking about how you leave a job. Whatever
Yeah,
job you're in actually has ramifications and can really set the pave way for the next person to be successful or have so
absolutely.
many challenges that they're going to fail within their first year
Yeah,
or two, depending on how
yeah,
you leave the house. Am I right?
exactly, exactly. And the process begins, I mean, we hear of successions when they happen. I mean, when we see a CEO come into a role, we see that particular date. Let's say it's 2026, right? We see an incoming CEO come into the role. But the journey actually begins, I would say, 2, 3 years even before that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing to keep in mind is that this is not like an overnight or even a 6 months process. It has to be a very intentional 2, 3 year process and journey. So you're right. So the person leaving has to literally be aware of leaving, as you said, the house in a good shape, but not just the night before, but literally, you know, 2 years before, right? Be sort of intentional about how they are leaving the role.
I was going to ask you about that because sometimes we get a choice how we
Yeah.
leave, and other times you don't, right?
Right, right.
And so I do talk to CEOs and I talk to presidents and VPs about what does it look like if you're not here? What does it look like if you're on vacation? And
Hmm.
who's left in charge? What does that look like? And I have individuals that really like to hold on to the fact that, like, well, they can't really function without me. I've got those personalities. And then I also have the personalities like I can't wait to get out the door and be on the cruise ship. Okay. And everything will
Yes.
be fine. And then when I come
Yeah.
back, I'll put that fire out. Meanwhile, you've got others associates running around going, "Oh, we don't know what to do while they're gone." So what would you suggest? I
Yeah.
mean, you talked about a couple of years with pathing for succession planning and creating opportunities for
Yeah.
that. How do you mentor/coach
Yeah.
for that?
I think that's such a great point. As I said, we've done some other work in the space of CEO succession. The board's involvement, because boards finally they have the fiduciary duty towards shareholders, and so they have a really important role to play in CEO successions. Of course, they make the appointments of course, with other inputs. So I think what we talk about in our other work is the importance of the board in having this partnership with an incoming CEO. I know that sounds early, but even coming in, starting to think about a succession plan or having a plan ahead for a succession plan. I think that conversation needs to begin quite early so that it doesn't come as a surprise or there's no awkwardness and there are this it's a very political process and it's so the more transparent and the more open you can be, the board can be about, from a governance standpoint, this is what we expect to see. I think it's actually beneficial for the outgoing CEO. It's obviously beneficial for the firm and its shareholders. In fact, what you just described are did another study where we find that there are actually four prototypes of outgoing CEOs. There are those that are, as you said, ready to get on the cruise ship. We call them the hypogenerative. We use the word generativity. There's a body of work on aging and life development that talks about generativity as if it's as a personality trait, as an individual difference attribute. And so in that space, we all as human beings care about the future, right? We all have a sense of what we leave behind, but we also have a need to control our surroundings and our environment. So based on a combination of our need to control, which is related to other things like narcissism, and our desire to leave and think about the future, we identify four prototypes. So in that, we do identify and we give examples of CEOs that are sort of, let me just leave. And those CEOs are also, it's not helpful for the firm to just say, I'm out of here. Then there are CEOs that are anti-generative, who actually do not want a successful replacement. They see themselves as so important and vital to the firm that they come in the way of their predecessors or even finding replacements. Then there are those that are hyper generative. So they are looking for people who are their clones. They just, and that is also not very helpful, because then you're not setting the firm up for a viable future. And then, of course, there are folks that are the perfect sort of mix of, I care about the future, I want to do what I can, and then leave. So yeah, absolutely. I think there is a huge variance in how outgoing CEOs take the job of leaving, how seriously they take that job. And it certainly matters for inclusion, as you can imagine.
Oh,
You know,
yes. Yes.
it's so pivotal for an incoming underrepresented person who's coming into the role. How you leave the house is going to matter for everybody, but it really matters for underrepresented leaders like women leaders.
Yes. What suggestion, and maybe I was going to ask you, like, what are you reading and what are you watching? But maybe
Mhm.
this is also like, what would you suggest our leaders read and watch to really prepare them if they're thinking about succession or if they're thinking about taking over a role for the next step?
Yeah, there was, that's very interesting. There is a lot of academic research. There is an older classic work called Passing the Baton. It's an older work many years ago, and the author is a person named Sonnenschein, if I remember correctly. But I actually read that piece that was written at least several decades ago, but it also rings true today, where, he really outlines the trends in the industry. He gives historical examples of, different types of CEOs and how they pass the baton to their incoming. So that was something that I found, it's a classic, but it seems very relevant even today. As I said, we've done some more research, but it's more academic research. But there's definitely room for thinking and working more on this topic, I think.
Yes. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and really sharing that research. I can't stress enough for those that are reading books. So we've got avid
Yeah,
readers out there and listeners. And I just want to stress to them that, statistics, there are statistics on this. And I would encourage them to look at it, especially
yeah,
if they're making, some choices and, what can we be doing and seek help out if you can't or you don't know how to do a successful succession plan,
yeah.
seek that out if it's not built already into your strategic plan. So I can't thank you enough for coming in.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about our work. I mean, we spend a lot of time behind the scenes, but it's always nice to talk about our work and hopefully reach a broader audience of practitioners, leaders, and others in the field.
Well, they're definitely out there. So, and we want to thank our listeners for catching the show and sharing it. We so appreciate you. We also would like to thank the Maine Intelligence Network. Come be part of a focused network of entrepreneurs, leaders, executives, and authors committed to sharpening leadership and strategy while scaling ventures with intention. This is a place where practical thinking meets high caliber connection. Check out the Maine at www.maesassociatesltd.com. We'd also like to thank Mamalino Custom Home Builders. Thank you to you as a sponsor, where they build custom homes with superior quality, value, and integrity. And of course, until next time.
The Pen Leader podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd., creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader podcast and share with others.